And we are live. Welcome to the NBA Strategy Show. It is Monday, December 23rd. I am Josh Engleman. I'm here to break down a lot of basketball. 14 games in total, 11 on the DraftKings slate, plus 3 more on the FanDuel slate. We have a ton to talk about. We're going to be here a while, folks. We're going to be here a while. Jake, good morning. Good morning to everybody in chat. Hope you guys had a great weekend. I did. No complaints. Hung out with the pup. All that good stuff. Josh Engleman, by the way. I don't in any way remember any part of the intro. So hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live, and follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman. Guessing it might be a little bit of a thin herd today, given the fact that we've got Christmas Eve tomorrow, we've got Christmas Day on Wednesday. Greg and I will be here for Christmas Day, 11 to 12. No basketball tomorrow, though. So let's get our fill today, shall we? Let's get our fill. Got to stretch it out. Tight start. Sore from all my celebrating of watching Liverpool beat the brakes off of Tottenham. It's a good time. Good time. Need to hydrate. We'll talk about promos in a little bit. We'll talk about everything. We got a lot going on. We got to get started right out of the gate because there is a billion games to look at today. And I'm going to need every possible second because I know chat will derail me at some point in time. And we are going to start it off. The Houston Rockets, 6-point favorites in Charlotte, 219.5 total. This is definitely one of the lower paced games. It looks like it's third slowest, which shouldn't be all that surprising. Obviously, Houston defense, really good. Obviously, Charlotte, not good at all. So for Houston, we don't technically have their injury report yet, which is one of the few spots that are at least a little annoying for us today. But we got plenty of time, and we'll obviously get this one. But they are on the back-to-back with the assumption that Tari Eason is questionable for this one. We don't totally know that for sure. He is the highest owned guy on DraftKings right now at 15%. Then you're getting Amin Thompson, Şengün, Jalen Green, all around 10. We got to remember on these bigger slates, our main focus is going to be finding the truly awesome plays. And I don't really think that Houston has one of those. I think you can make a case that Jabari Smith is at least a hair under-owned at 5,500. He's power forward center eligible. He's playing like 34 minutes a night. If Tari Eason is out, if you feel even better about getting to someone like Jabari Smith, but he's only 4% owned. And there's just really not a ton of ownership coming in. If Eason plays, he's an all right value because of how good he is on a per minute basis. But I don't think there's any sort of priority here for Houston. There are a bunch of spots today that look quite a bit better than this one does. And the problem with Houston is that you're okay with getting basically anybody that plays real minutes. You want to roster Fred VanVleet, Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Alperen Şengün, Amin Thompson, Tari Eason. Like, they all look solid. They're all 5 to 10% type guys. I don't necessarily have anybody that I'm looking to take a stand on. I think Jabari looks the best in any sort of GPP setting. VanVleet is properly owned. Jalen Green's properly owned. There's just not really anybody that catches my eye from Houston. Now, if Eason does end up out, you kind of just feel better about those 6 dudes. You know, we started to see Jayshawn Tate got a little bit of run yesterday. Cam Whitmore got a little bit of run yesterday. Don't think that's really good for those guys if Eason happens to play, but I think you're just kind of casting a wide net for Houston. Now, on the Charlotte side, we do have their injury report. no Trey Mann, no Brandon Miller. Everything else we're kind of used to. What you're not getting, though, for this Charlotte team is ownership in any way. One of the worst teams to get to. They're obviously running into a pretty difficult spot. Why is LaMelo a 22% usage guy in my model and Miles Bridges is 30? That must be hard-coded incorrectly. Oh yeah, that is very hard-coded incorrectly. Let's delete all of that. So, for Charlotte, would I be willing to get to LaMelo Ball? Yeah, 9,800 on DraftKings, 10-2 on FanDuel. It's fine. Miles Bridges at 6,800 with no Brandon Miller around. He's fine. Well, look where the ownership is right now. 6% to LaMelo on DraftKings. Nobody else is higher than 2 on either DraftKings and FanDuel. You're running into a really good defense, a pace down matchup, and not a lot of really good per minute talent. Josh Green's not that guy. Cody Martin's not that guy. Salon's not that guy. The bench runners, not those guys. So I think really the only realistic options to me from Charlotte are Ball and Bridges. And I don't think either one of these guys is going to be any sort of priority today. I think you're avoiding Charlotte. We got to remember, there's 22 teams on the DraftKings slate. It shouldn't be surprising to have some spots that are just essentially cross-offs. But if it's anything from Charlotte, it's Ball and Bridges. The Utah Jazz are 2 touchdown underdogs in Cleveland, 232 total. So the total's a little bit better here, but Utah's not exactly running into a great matchup. They also have a Q tag on Kyle Filipowski. We don't know if he's going to be with us. Keontae George is questionable with a left ankle sprain. And that's about it. Colin Sexton is in. Now, ownership-wise, it's not happening here. 5, 6, 6, and 5% to Markkanen, Collins, Kessler, and Clarkson. And that is kind of where those guys should be. I got John Collins to 7% optimal. He's 6% owned. Certainly fine. You know, you're not going to hate it if you get one of these 27 plus minute guys, but there's no priorities here. John Collins got to 12% ownership on FanDuel. I think that's just a case of, you know, having three positions and playing north of 30 minutes. But how do you want to get to Utah here? You know, they're going up against one of the best teams in the league right now. Certainly one of the best regular season teams in the league. Where do we find the value? Especially if all these guys for Utah are in. Now, if Keontae George happens to be out, that'll be a little bit different. Because we had no Keontae George 2 days ago on Saturday. That got us 30 minutes of Jordan Clarkson. That got us well north of 30 on Markkanen. That got us 33 on Colin Sexton. That got us 35 on John Collins. That game was competitive enough that those guys could get enough time. Even in that case, I don't think that we're going to have anybody on Utah that looks great just because of what this matchup entails. So if you want to get to the Markkanen, Collins, Kessler, Clarkson group, yeah, should they be in like 5% of your lineups if you're playing a lot? Should you be prioritizing the Utah Jazz against the Cleveland Cavaliers today? I don't think so. And then for Cleveland, it's kind of the same story we always get for these guys. Unless somebody ends up out, we never really get any Cleveland ownership. And it's just because they've got this rotation that has everybody just set in stone. And they've blown out so many teams that you just never have their starters playing that 35, 36 minutes that you're used to. We've got a Q tag on Sam Merrill. We got Max Strus back in their last game. Or was that 2 games ago now? Weekends are always tough. It was 2 games ago, but he didn't play the second half of the back-to-back. And we're not getting any ownership in here for Cleveland. Now, the matchup is better, but these guys are all priced where they should be. They're all priced where they should be. And you're getting, Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, all in that 5% range. Essentially nothing else coming in for Jared Allen or LeVert. LeVert looks fine. He's 5,300. He's playing like 25 minutes a night. He's 1% owned. We got Darius Garland to 11% on FanDuel. That's where he should be. You can make a case that Donovan Mitchell's a couple percentage points under-owned on the FanDuel side, but not by much. These are just, when you have these 22 teams on a main slate for DraftKings, you got to think most of these teams are going to have their pay-up options playing 35 minutes a night. And Cleveland just doesn't project like that. And it becomes very difficult. And then not only does it become difficult, but then you have to get the dude right. Because it's not like Mitchell and Garland and Mobley are all going to be the guys that go crazy. Like the expectation is, you get one of them. So now you're having to choose between just three guys on the same team to try to get it right. And that's why I think you start to see these optimal rates all stay sub 10. They're all like 15 to 20% to hit their target score. But you're looking for 50 plus on a day like today from Donovan Mitchell. You're looking at close to 50 for Evan Mobley. You need 45 plus out of Darius Garland. They're just not frequent. You're hoping to get one guy out of the Cleveland Cavs to be worth it. But I don't really know what you go to here for Cleveland. I certainly don't have any problem getting Mitchell, Garland, or Mobley, but I don't think they're guys that you're going to be getting a lot of. They're certainly not going to be guys that are showing up in cash lineups in any sort of volume. This game's a shame. This one's a real shame. Boston Celtics, 10-point favorites in Orlando, 214.5 total. Boston is largely at full strength for this one. That's not a good sign for the Orlando Magic. Sam Hauser is questionable. That's the only piece of news up in the air for Boston. But look at the ownership here. I'm going to just read off the numbers. It doesn't even matter what name they're attached to. 0 1 1 1 1 0 0 0 0. I'm just reading this off in binary. I didn't get anybody higher than 6% optimal. The boom scores for Tatum, Brown, White, and Holiday are all at 10%. So I think Boston looks even worse than Cleveland does. I'd be more likely to get to the Cleveland guys before I got to Boston. Now, Orlando obviously continues to just be losing so many dudes and potentially don't have Suggs. Their defense will still hold up just because of the personnel that Orlando has, but their offense is going to have a hell of a time getting a bucket here against Boston's D. You want to go to those guys that play 28 plus. Tatum, Brown, White, Holiday, Porzingis, Horford to a degree. They're available, but this is just like Cleveland. You're hoping that one of these Boston guys hits their target score. You need 60 plus out of Jason Tatum today. You need 50 out of Jaylen Brown at 8K. I guess I think Derek White actually looks the best. You get that $6,600 price tag. He's point guard, shooting guard eligible. Should he be 5 to 10% owned? Probably. I think Derek White's probably like my first. I'd like to have a little bit more of him GPP play. But there's not anybody that I'm going crazy here for Boston. Because there's just too many different dudes that can get it done. And it doesn't seem like the type of matchup where you're going to need somebody to just take it over. Because it's going to be really hard for Orlando to stay in this game offensively. They essentially don't have offensive talent left over. Now, for Orlando, they're obviously still without Paolo. They're still without Franz. Mo Wagner tore his ACL over the weekend, so he's going to be done for the year. Gary Harris is questionable. We've been waiting to get him back. And then Jalen Suggs is questionable. They don't have a single positive offensive player in their lineup. Not a single guy on Orlando projects to be an above average offensive player. Whoa, DQ, really? Is that true? They cut the late games as well? I just assumed they didn't because they never do. Holy shit, they did. All right, 11 games on both sites. DQ, thanks for pointing that out. FanDuel just never does that, so I didn't even think twice. Well, that's fun. 11 game slate no matter what. So we are getting some ownership into Orlando. And if Suggs happens to sit, we're going to get a lot more of it. Because they're just running out of bodies, and there's going to be some cheap guys that pull some value. I mean, if Suggs sits, the most expensive guy on the team is Goga at 64. The second most expensive team, or expensive guy on the slate for Orlando will be Wendell Carter Jr. at 4,800. So we're going to need the Suggs news. Now, people are going to want to go to Suggs because he's going to take every shot he could possibly take if he's in. But I don't like getting to Orlando right now. Wendell Carter Jr. is projected for 15% ownership. That makes sense. You know, Goga got to 10. They're going to have to change up what they're doing at the 4-5 now with no Mo Wagner for the rest of this season. So I understand getting to Suggs and Carter and Goga as the guys that, are going to get the run. They're established starters no matter what. They're definitely the names I would want the most. And, KCP is going to be under-owned for these scenarios. He could take on a little bit more. The minutes are certainly going to be there for him. But we need to prepare for what Orlando ends up looking like if Jalen Suggs happens to be out. Like, if Gary Harris is out, whatever. It's whatever. But if Suggs ends up out, we're filling in 30 plus more minutes to Anthony Black, Cole Anthony, Jet Howard, Corey Joseph has been exhumed by this Magic team. We're going to end up with value here if Suggs ends up out. If he ends up in, I would argue they're a little over-owned. I think it becomes very difficult to be happy about getting Orlando guys in this spot because they are just so devoid of offensive creation that they're going to be jacking up a lot of really negative shots. But we need the Suggs news. That's the biggest piece. It's a 7 o'clock start. We're going to have this. We have 4 games that lock at 7. We've got 3 more at 7:30, 3 more at 8 o'clock. We are going to be getting crushed with news in the run-up to lock and all the way up until 8 o'clock. Now, luckily, the slate just ends at 8:30 with that Portland-Dallas game. But we're talking lots of news. And that Suggs news will be very, very, very important. I got to exclude these games quickly. Don't need them showing up any longer. These first 3 games are really bleak. Like, the most owned team out of these first 3 games it's Orlando and Houston. And it's not like anybody was just going to be in everything. So keep your eyes peeled for this Jalen Suggs news. If he ends up out, we're probably going to get a decent chunk of Anthony Black. He'll project really well. Cole Anthony probably projects a bit better. Corey Joseph becomes a guy at 3,200. These are all things we don't want. Let's just have Suggs in so that we don't have to play the scrap heap Orlando Magic against the defending champs. I think that would be better for all of us if we can make that happen. Now we get to game number 4, the San Antonio Spurs, 5-point underdogs in Philly, 217.5 total. This is the second lowest total on today's slate, and it is tied for the 4th slowest game. And we are not getting ownership into San Antonio for this one, and that's not all that surprising. This game does not project well. San Antonio is projected to lose 2.5 possessions compared to their averages. The only guy that got any real ownership was Devin Vassell on DraftKings, a little over 10%. He's shooting guard, small forward eligible, 5,400. He's moved into the starting lineup where he should be. I'd argue that he's a hair over owned. Wemby's 11K. He's not getting owned at all. 1% ownership to Wemby on DraftKings. I have him 2% optimal. You need 66 out of him. Maybe if he blocks 10 shots again, you'll be able to do something like that. I mean, the most owned guy on FanDuel is Devin Vassell. It's 5%. I mean, what could you want to get to here from San Antonio? One, they're starting to consolidate that rotation. Zach Collins out of the rotation last game. They're going to Charles Bassey. Like Keldon Johnson bench run. That's not exciting, but he's the best point per dollar play that I have for San Antonio. You want to get a couple shares of an unowned Chris Paul. I could see it. Well, what are you clicking on for San Antonio that you're super excited about? You just need so much. Like, Devin Vassell is probably the guy that I'm most interested in, and he's the guy that's getting the most ownership, but I don't see it as some sort of spot that I want to go crazy for. I'd argue Paul's underowned. I don't see the path for Sohan. It's really hard to want to spend 11K on Wemby here. It's not that he doesn't look good, but we've got Giannis against the Bulls with no Damian Lillard. It's like, if we're talking about pay-ups, the first place you're going is Milwaukee. Do you guys like anything here from San Antonio? Like, obviously you're okay with getting to Wemby, but it's not like he projects well. I mean, I have him with a 10% chance of getting 65 fantasy points. That means, like, let's just say it, 90% of the time, it's probably not the score you needed to win the contest you're in. That makes today really difficult. It's hard to prioritize anybody from San Antonio. This game is so slow. This total is so low. I mean, we're going to get into games with, we have like 5 more games with pace north of 99 and totals in the 230s. This is a game that's 5 possessions slower than some of the fastest games. It's 20 points below the total. So I don't see it for San Antonio outside of a little bit of Devin Vassell. Now for Philly, Eric Gordon is out, left oral surgery. McCain obviously out for a while. Embiid is available, and Ricky Council is questionable. But just like the San Antonio side, we're not getting any love here either. Now, I think Embiid looks good at 9,600, but he's 9% owned. It's not like anybody's getting there. Paul George got to 9% on FanDuel at 8K. That makes sense. Tyrese Maxey, unowned. Kelly Oubre, unowned. I do think Embiid should be around 10% owned. It's a lot easier for him to hit his target score at 9,600. I have his target just shy of 60. I think he does it 22% of the time. It's a lot easier to get to Joel Embiid than it is to get to Victor Wembanyama. But again, he didn't get to 10% optimal in my numbers. He got to 8. I mean, you need 10 fantasy points more than his projection. That's a lot. But he's the guy you want from Philly. And I'll always be willing to take Tyrese Maxey flyers in GPPs. I'll always be willing to take Paul George flyers in GPPs. I think it's pretty hard to want to go to Kelly Oubre or Caleb Martin or KJ Martin or any of those backup centers. Maybe if Ricky Council ends up out, we're rolling the dice on like Kyle Lowry potentially, but I don't even think that's real. I don't think there's enough minutes there. Philly's 12% owned overall. I mean, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we have 9 teams that are 20% owned or less. Philly's just in this group of teams that there's not a lot that stands out. But I think it's pretty clear. If you are getting to Philly, you're getting to Joel Embiid before you get to anybody else. The rest of these guys are pretty strictly GPP only options. So let's talk schedule for the rest of the day. 10 a.m., you're getting the NHL strategy show. Remember what I just said. 10 a.m. NHL strategy show. 10:15 NFL strategy show. I will be back with Spags tonight for the deeper dive. He and I will break down these 11 games. We'll have a lot more information at that point. Greg and Eric will be here for NBA Live Before Lock. And then Laffy and Matt Gajeski will hit you guys with NFL Live Before Lock, 7:15. You guys got Monday Night Football tonight. All right, game number 5. Minnesota Timberwolves, 4-point favorites in Atlanta, 221 total. I think we're all pretty used to what we get out of the Minnesota Timberwolves, but what we are getting is a boatload of ownership to Naz Reid. But we are getting a lot more ownership to Minnesota than we have for some of these other teams. They're in that 90 to 100 range across both sites. That's 10 to Anthony Edwards, 10 to Jaden McDaniels, 30 to Naz Reid. Now, that will not be 30 when we get to lock, but he will probably be the most owned Minnesota Timberwolf. He was certainly my most interesting guy. Showed up 13% optimal, 23% chance of hitting 32 fantasy points. We're also getting 15 to DiVincenzo, and between 5 and 10 on Gobert and Randall and Conley and Walker. They play 8 guys. The large majority of their minutes. Naz Reid very clearly the best per minute option here. The pace of this matchup is really helpful for Minnesota. They gain 2.8 possessions over their average. So this is a massive pace up spot for Minnesota. This is the first team that I want to make sure that I have a bunch of. I like getting to Naz Reid. He's very easy to roster at 4,400 with power forward eligibility. Also has the center eligibility. At some point in time, I expect Dante DiVincenzo to make a 3. So getting to him seems fine. But you can see my optimal rates are just sort of mirroring the ownership rates. 7, 6, 7, 7 on Edwards and Gobert and Randall and McDaniels. I like filling out my lineups with Minnesota. It's Naz Reid's the priority of these guys. But there's not a dude in their rotation. There's not a single dude in their rotation that I think should be avoided today. Like Mike Conley's the guy I want the least, but he's also 4,700 and not a bad per minute guy. So very rosterable. And every once in a while, that guy's just going to fall into 30 minutes and you're not going to see it coming. But every single Minnesota guy in their main rotation, those main 8 guys, they're all in play in that 5 to 10% range at a minimum, with Naz Reid being the best guy you can get to. So Minnesota's the first team that we could actually, that we've talked about in this show that actually has some standing. But a lot of this ownership is going to pick up in the future. It's not picking up with the Atlanta Hawks, though. Bogdan Bogdanovic is questionable. Trae Young is questionable. Onyeka Okongwu is still out. So obviously, Atlanta has the opportunity to look very different depending on how those injuries break. Like if Trae Young ends up out, a lot of these guys are going to look very different with a lot more value. If Bogdanovic ends up out, we'll probably be able to create a little bit more value. But right now, all we have is 10% ownership coming into Clint Capella and no more than 3 to anybody else. Now, I think Trae Young, if he's playing, is underowned. He was 9% optimal for me, 20% boom at 57 fantasy points, 1% owned. Trae Young is a guy that I would like to get to in a larger field GPP if he plays. I do think there's upside in Capella playing a couple extra minutes. We did get a bunch more minutes out of Larry Nance last time out. Nance is 4,500 power forward center. You can get to him, but he doesn't look great. There's nothing really that you should get to like crazy for Atlanta outside of Trae Young. And he might not even play. And if he doesn't play, like Vit Krejci, point guard, shooting guard, 3,300, we're probably going to get to him for a little bit of value. DeAndre Hunter will look better. Jalen Johnson will certainly look better. But right now, we don't have any major stands coming from Atlanta. We really going to do this Towns Randall stuff again? I'm so tired of talking about it. So tired of it. Let's see where the lineups rank. I can't help myself. Minnesota starting 5. Plus 8.8. Conley, Edwards, McDaniels, Randall, Gobert. Knicks starting 5. Brunson, Hart, Bridges, Anunoby, Towns. Plus 7.3. Yes, the starting lineup for the Minnesota Timberwolves has been better than the starting lineup for the New York Knicks. The starting lineup for Minnesota this year is 0.6 of a point, I believe, lower than what it was last year with Towns in the Randall spot. So I will continue to tell people to pump the brakes on everything they see. It should be no surprise to anyone at all that Karl Anthony Towns is a lot better on offense when he gets to play the 5. None of this is shocking. None of this is surprising. He's playing really well. Can't seem to miss a shot. They still haven't been as good as the Minnesota starting 5. What team has more wins is all that's important. I could not care less about what wins are. Nothing is more predictive than point differential. So, for all the histrionics about Minnesota, starting 5 has performed better than the New York Knicks. The biggest problem for Minnesota is that Dante DiVincenzo turned into a pumpkin. If Dante DiVincenzo can't make a damn 3, they're going to be in trouble. They're going to be in trouble. And right now, Dante DiVincenzo is shooting 33% from 3, coming off of back-to-back 40% years. He's shooting 47% at the rim. Dante DiVincenzo can't make a bucket, guys. That's our problem here. Yeah. Nick, that's an interesting point, because that's probably a little bit of the spacing, for sure. You know, you replace Randall with Towns. It's a little bit more congested. And now Anthony Edwards is taking 2 less shots at the rim. Mitchell, I don't know what you mean. Can you do it for just Cat and Randall? I don't know what that means. Yeah, and very, very different shooting profile. So here's the real question. Because what's good and what's bad here? Because technically, Ant is shooting the exact same amount of shots as he did last year, and at a higher efficiency. You would like to see him get to the rim more just because of what he is, but he's cut his mid-range and cut those rim shots and turned them into 3s, and that's working. Now, if you get him space, I think you get the best of both worlds. I think you get him easier shots at the rim, and he continues to take those 3s. But if he's going to cut out mid-range shots, it's actually working for Ant. So, I don't know. I think people are way too critical of the Minnesota Timberwolves at this point. Let's forget, everybody that's being critical about Minnesota in this trade are definitely the same people that dumped on the Gobert trade in year 1 and then thought it was the best thing since sliced bread in year 2. Maybe we give these guys a little bit more than 30 games. That feels like something we should probably do. But Minnesota's starting lineup hasn't changed at all on court from an impact metric. I don't think we should be ignoring that. I don't know why we would. I don't know why we would. Alrighty. So that's Atlanta. Brandon, what do you mean? Does what account for missed games? The lineup information we were looking at is just every possession those dudes have played together as a starting five. It's essentially the exact same starting five net rating for Minnesota that they had last year. Yeah, that doesn't affect anything for Cat missing time. It's just the possessions that they've played with that starting five. I think we're way too quick to write off Minnesota. I continue to prefer the Minnesota side of that deal. They created some additional salary flexibility. I think if I'm Minnesota, I'm going to give this one more minute and then I'm going to move on with my with what we're doing. This is what I would like to see Minnesota do. I don't think they'll do it. I don't know if Brooklyn would want to do this. But I think there's something here that could get built, that could get this done. The Wolves have to worry about being over the second apron, so they can't aggregate salaries. And asset-wise, they're in some trouble. But if I'm the Wolves, I want to find out if I could turn Randall into Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. Or at the very least, Cam Johnson and salary filler. But I would want to take a peek at that. Yeah, you can't start Naz Reid at the 5 or your defense is dead. They'll never do that. You can't play Naz Reid and Julius Randle at the 4-5, or your entire defensive identity goes away. Why trade Randle if they're just as good with him? Very good question. It's a very good question. I can understand why you would ask it. And there's a really easy reason why. And the answer is money. Julius Randle has a $31 million player option next year. Cam Johnson is already under contract for 2 more years after this. Dorian Finney-Smith has another year after this one. They're going to have a decision point to make whether they want to extend a 30-year-old Julius Randle in the offseason or let him go for nothing, which is a death sentence for Minnesota. If they let Julius Randle go, he doesn't exercise his player option. He just goes out and gets a free agent deal. Minnesota can't fill that with anything. So then they're just dead. At that point in time, Minnesota doesn't have the assets to go get anything and don't create any sort of value. So I think they're at a decision point when they get to the deadline of, do you want to extend him or do you want to turn him into something else that could help make this team work? I would lean on trading him and trying to bring in different pieces that seem to fit a little bit better, because ultimately you're probably going to have to cut him 3 years, $100 million. Do you want to do that for age 31, 32, 33 Randall? I don't know. But salary-wise, they need to do something with that slot. Nick smashed the trade. Matt Miles, did you have cotton jammed in your ears for the past 10 minutes or no? Seems like it. Seems like it. Brooklyn Nets, team we just talked about. 10-point dogs in Miami, 213 total. This is the lowest total on today's slate. This is the lowest pace on today's slate. And there is no ownership coming into this Brooklyn team. Now, Dorian Finney-Smith is questionable. We are waiting on that news. it matters for potential value options for the rest of Brooklyn. It's going to be like 29 minutes that you need to reallocate. Jalen Martin's questionable. Dariq Whitehead's questionable. All the guys that have normally been out are out. Ben Simmons got to 6% ownership. He's been playing like 29, 30 minutes a night. Like Day'Ron Sharpe is the most owned guy on DraftKings. But is that like, do we want to be getting to backup center for the Brooklyn Nets, Day'Ron Sharpe, on a day with 11 games? I don't. And if I'm not getting there, like, what do I really want to get to? Like, do you guys like anything from the Nets today? I mean, between this pace, this matchup, this total, like, they're arguably the worst team that I think you can get to today. I don't know how you want to do it. I really don't. There's not a single name that, like I'm okay getting to Ben Simmons. I'm okay getting some Cam Johnson. I don't think any of it looks particularly good. Yeah, Chubbs, I'm with you. I think Simmons is probably your best option here. Getting Randall off the team for Cat is a massive dub. Yep, I don't agree. Do not agree. I don't know why the Nets re-signed Claxton. You don't let talent walk out the door. Tradable. It's tradable. Let's look at Miami. Now, this team is really tough to want to get to for a couple different reasons. Obviously, Hero, Butler, Bam, always playable, always 5% type dudes. No one got double-digit ownership. Hero's at 9. I do think Tyler Hero looks the best, but I don't know what these guys are going to be doing between Duncan Robinson, Drew Smith, Jovic, Larson. Haywood Highsmith played like 6 minutes last time out. So the bench guys for Miami are impossible to get to. When they start Jovic, he kind of just plays the first quarter and the third quarter and nothing else. But at some point in time, somebody's minutes have to go away, or they're just going to start sitting someone. And it's also possible that we don't have Jimmy Butler today. He's still questionable. If he's not in, you feel a lot better about Hero. You feel a lot better about Bam. You feel okay about getting to someone like Terry Rozier. But we need that Jimmy Butler news. Stomach illness for like 4 or 5 days. It has not been going well here for Big Face Coffee. But ultimately, this game's too slow. And this total's too rough to really want to get to it. I have Miami losing 3.2 possessions below their average. This is a massive pace down spot for the Miami Heat. And it's making it so that it's not all that appealing to get to. So we'll move it on. Raptors and Knicks. Stop me if you've heard this before. Not a lot of ownership coming in here. Looks a little bit better on the FanDuel side. Now, Toronto does not have an injury report yet. So we do not know the status of RJ Barrett. We don't know the status of Kelly Olynyk. It doesn't seem like Jakob Poeltl is going to be playing in this one. Bruce Brown is slowly but surely getting himself back here. We did get 10% ownership to Scotty Barnes. He is the guy that I would want to get to. There's not really anybody else from Toronto that I would want unless we got more guys out. Like if Barrett ends up out, we're going to be able to get to, probably Jacoby Walter or Jamal Shed, something like that. But there's no ownership here outside of Barnes. We did get Kelly Olynyk to 20% ownership on FanDuel. If he's in, he's power forward center eligible, 4,400. Only has Jonathan Mugbo. And by Mugbo, I mean Mobo, for anybody that thinks that that's getting said incorrectly. He's only got him ahead of him. So I get the path for Olynyk. He's a fantasy point per minute dude. But where's the stand you take here? Now, you're not all that worried about going up against the Knicks defense. They are offense first, but it's really Barnes and not much else. But we need that RJ Barrett news more than anything. That will tell us what we're really doing with Toronto. Because Barrett's missed the last two. He didn't play on the 19th. He did not play yesterday. Jakob Poeltl has missed both of those games as well. If they both are out again, it's really like Agbaji's a bad per minute guy. Grady Dick is fine. Mobo's fine. You need more minutes for Jamal Shed or Walter or Jamison Battle. But we need to know what that injury status is going to be. Now, for the New York Knicks, the team that is wildly overrated. Not a ton of ownership coming in here. Anunoby is the guy that is getting the biggest ownership. That's going to be around 10%. And I think that makes sense. He was 11% optimal. I actually have Jalen Brunson as the most optimal guy. But it's only 12%. Bridges is 8. Hart is 9. Towns is 8. I think we all know what we need to do here with the Knicks. And it's just play the starting five. Like, I think Bridges is a little underowned. I think Hart is a little underowned. Anunoby's properly owned. Towns is properly owned. Brunson's properly owned. You don't play McBride. You don't play Payne. You don't play Achua. You don't play Sims. But you just play these 5 starters from the Knicks, and you hope you get the right one. But I think Brunson's the best guy you can get to here from New York. Anunoby's the most flexible, but Brunson's the guy I want the most. Brunson's the guy I'm looking at most. Any one of those starting 5, though, more than reasonable to get into a lineup. 8 to 12% optimal sounds pretty good to me. Milwaukee Bucks, 1.5 point favorites in Chicago, 233 total. This one matters because Giannis is questionable. Dame is doubtful. Middleton is probable. Now, if we get Giannis in, he's currently projected for 60% ownership on DraftKings, 50 on FanDuel. He's clearly the number one pay-up option to get to today. It's a great matchup for him against the Bulls. Massive pace-up spot. No Damian Lillard to take any of the ownership. I don't know how you avoid wanting to use Giannis as the pay-up. The clear best pay-up option. The best value play today? Shout out Ryan Rollins, the guy that everybody thought DeLon Wright would be. Ryan Rollins got the start. Now he's 3,500, point guard only. 86% ownership on Ryan Rollins on DraftKings right now, 90 on FanDuel. Now those numbers will work themselves down as we get more news. But the easiest name that you guys can click on today, assuming Ryan Rollins is starting at the point for Milwaukee again, is Ryan Rollins. Get as much as you can. He's 3,500. You need less fantasy points than I have him projected as his target score. 57% chance of going for 27. You want all of the Giannis you can get. You want all of the Ryan Rollins you can get. And you probably don't want anything else from Milwaukee. Roll the dice on Bobby Portis, I guess. Roll the dice on Chris Middleton, I guess. The real thing you should be doing is jamming Giannis Antetokounmpo and jamming Ryan Rollins. Now, if Giannis ends up out, I don't need to tell you guys that you need to be playing Bobby Portis. Chris Middleton will certainly look a little bit better. Taurean Prince will be picking up a bunch of value. You'll probably like AJ Green and Andre Jackson a bit more. Gary Trent will look better. Everything changes if Giannis doesn't play. You guys know this. But if Giannis is in, the first unequivocal gotta have it dudes for this slate are Giannis and Ryan Rollins. Now on the Bulls, Giddey, questionable once again. There's no ownership coming into Chicago. Most we got is 6% to Kobe White. All these guys are sort of just at their price tags now. I did have Kobe White as the most optimal at 7%. Not a lot to write home about here, though, for Chicago. They actually lose 1.5 possessions below their average. So We need the Giddey news that could create a little value. But as I see it, if you want to take somebody from Chicago, it's going to be one of Levine, Vooch, White, Dosunmu, or Giddey. Otherwise, you're skipping the Bulls. One thing I want to touch on before we finish off these final 3 games in a really quick amount of time, NFL Max Package. If you want to sign up at Stokastic, we've locked in the price. It's $179. It will take you all the way until the Super Bowl. Projections, ownership, sims, premium Discord. You get everything we have for $179, and you won't pay anything else for the rest of the NFL season. There's a link in the description if you want to sign up, or you could use the promo code CELEBRATE when you sign up. I mean, between Monday Night Football and Thursday Night Football and full slates and showdown games and what the playoffs will be, now's the perfect time to get in, guys. We've got a lot of unique slates in the NFL coming up over these next few weeks. All right, 3 to go. LA Clippers, 6-point dogs in Memphis, 229 total. Now, we are getting ownership to the Clippers, around 15 for Powell, around 15 for Zubats, around 10 for Chris Dunn, around 20 for Kevin Porter Jr. Now, I do think KPJ looks the best. Plays about 25 minutes a night. Could grab an extra minute or 2 from time to time. I think he should be the guy that gets the most ownership. But after that, I don't know how you want to really prioritize the Clippers. They look a lot like Minnesota to me, like a slightly lesser version of Minnesota. You want to get 5 to 10% of Powell, of Harden, of Zubats, of Coffee, of Dunn, of Porter. I think that makes a ton of sense. Do I think that you should be taking a stand on anybody for the Clippers? No. It is a massive pace-up spot. They gain 3.5 possessions over their average, but they are running into a really unfun defensive matchup. The Grizzlies are 6th in defensive rating. They're essentially at full strength, more or less. No smart for this one, but I do like getting to parts of LA. I just don't know how you choose one of them. Now, Memphis, I don't want. If you're rostering anybody, it's probably Zach Edey. He's playing like 25 minutes a night. He's 4,800. He's well over a fantasy point per minute guy. The value is certainly there. He's got the body size that could hold up against Ivica Zubats. But other than that, 3% to Jackson, 1% to Morant, 2% to Desmond Bane. These guys just don't play enough. They don't play enough. They play a lot of guys. A lot of these dudes play like 22 minutes a night. Morant very rarely gets up over 30. Bane basically never does. Jackson basically never does. And it's a massive pace down spot for Memphis. So it's Edey and nothing else for me. LaRavia is probably like the 80th best option today. Let's see. Where do I have Jake LaRavia ranked? I have Jake LaRavia as the 142nd best play on today's slate. So, yeah, I'm not going to... I'm mad that I even said his name. The Wizards are 18-point underdogs in Oklahoma City, taking on the Thunder. Bilal Coulibaly is questionable for this one. No Kyle Kuzma still. 10% ownership to Sarr, who's been playing a little bit north of 30 minutes as of late. He's 5,400. He's power forward center eligible. He's terrible at basketball. But so is Bilal Coulibaly. So is Bub Carrington. So is Corey Kispert. So is Keyshawn George. This whole team sucks. Sucks. If I'm playing anybody from Washington, there's only one option. There's 2 options. I would play Sarr, but he's terrible. I'd be willing to play Jordan Poole in a GPP at 1% owned. I got him 10% optimal. He's 7,500. He's point guard, shooting guard eligible. He plays 34 minutes a night now. He's going to take every shot he could possibly take. If any sign of this game is competitive, Jordan Poole's probably having a decent scoring game. But why would you want Washington here against OKC? They're running into a buzzsaw. Don't prioritize these guys. Sarr and Poole and nothing else, please. OKC, 25% ownership to Jalen Williams, 20 to Hartenstein, 10 to Shea. I think Shea's under-owned. Jalen Williams looks awesome today at 8,100 against the Washington Wizards. They don't have people that can stop him. Hartenstein should beast. Alex Sarr is not going to be able to handle his size and his power. He's 20% owned. He deserves every bit of that. Jalen Williams is massively owned on FanDuel. I agree with it. I'm happy to get to Lou Dort. I don't want any part of Wallace, Caruso, Joe, Wiggins. Jalen Williams with a Y is back now. That complicates matters and adds another guy to their rotation. But if you're playing guys from OKC, Shea, Jalen, Hartenstein, Dort, the priorities, Jalen Williams and Isaiah Hartenstein. Our final game before you guys get a little bit of the NHL strategy show. Portland Trailblazers, 10-point dogs in Dallas, 228 total. Portland is essentially at full strength. We have a Q tag on Delano Banton. Don't think it matters. 8% ownership to Simons. Nobody else is 3 or higher. I didn't get anybody higher than 8% optimal. I don't mind DeAndre Ayton in a GPP. I don't mind Jeremy Grant in a GPP. I don't have a single priority from Portland. They don't look good. They aren't good. They're very untalented. Their offense stinks. Their defense stinks. Without anybody out, I don't know how you get to Portland. Dallas, we don't know yet. Luka Doncic is questionable. It's the final game of the slate. It's the 8:30 start. We don't even know if we'll get that by 8 o'clock. If Luka is in, I don't really think you're getting to anything from Dallas. Luka would be the guy you'd want to get to the most. I don't think he looks as good as some of the other pay-ups. He's much more likely to be in that Victor Wembanyama camp, but Luka's projected for 1% ownership. And if he's in, then Kyrie looks worse. PJ Washington looks worse. Clay looks worse. You can't get to Dinwiddie. You can't get to Grimes. You could always get a little bit of Lively, but I don't think he looks great. So there's really not a lot here. Now, if we don't get Luka, everybody gets a bump and we're probably getting some Kyrie Irving in our lives. But we got to get that news before we do anything. 11 games up, 11 games down. We've got a jam-packed schedule today. Tons of basketball, NHL, Monday Night Football. Whatever you guys are looking for in the DFS space today, you're going to get it out of Stokastic. So hit that like button on your way out the door. Thank you guys for being here. Contenders coming out in a bit. I'm back for the deeper dive at 5, but NHL strategy and NFL strategy show both coming up in the next 15 minutes. Good luck, everybody. Let's have some fun. And since I won't talk to you guys until Wednesday, enjoy your Christmas Eve. If you're with your family, I hope everything is awesome. I will see you guys Wednesday morning.